Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, everyone, welcome back. Tim Watrous here, and glad to be back with another K-12 Politics and Tech. Kevin, glad to see you again.
Yep, we got some interesting stuff for today.
Yeah, so the story that won't go away and we can't get resolution to, but everyone is anxious to hear more about. What's the latest with the bickering back in DC about the stimulus?
Yeah, it's circling the drain. So, I mean, we hear all this rhetoric back and forth, and probably, I mean, we saw a real culmination in it with Nancy Pelosi's, the speaker's comments about being challenged on why won't you just compromise. And one of the things she was talking about was the fact that, there are, the Republicans in the Senate and Steve Mnuchin in particular, the White House, want them to drop a lot of the things that deal with early ed, child care, stuff that's for, very, very small children. And that's something they're just not willing to do. And so in politics, they say, come on, they're getting pretty close. $1.8 trillion as opposed to her 2.2 trillion. The problem that they forget is that the Democrats in the House have come down significantly over what their original HEROES Act proposal was, which was $3.4 trillion, remember? And they've been even higher than that before. So when the president tweets out, which he did just in the last couple of days, go big or go home, and essentially communicates to a lot of people that he's in favor of a spending plan that's bigger than both the Democrats and Republicans. You can imagine that the Speaker and House Democrats are frustrated because you hear that sort of bumper sticker kind of approach, we're for more, but then they can't get to an agreement over some of this stuff where they just have really strong principles about some of the things that they don't want to see get dumped. As a result, it just makes it dimmer and dimmer that we're likely to get anything. But that said, again, I am still anticipating that, if Trump does get reelected, which is obviously a possibility, that we will see a post-election stimulus put together because Trump realizes he needs one. You never know. You just never know. They could try to still put one together before the election because I think Trump is really, really concerned about the economic fallout of no stimulus actually manifesting itself before the election. And I think he's really concerned about that. So they keep coming in her direction. So if she keeps holding out, who knows? Maybe they'll get somewhere. But yeah, a little name calling and definitely some high blood pressure going on back in Washington, D.C. again this week. We're watching it real closely. I always like to remind everybody that watches this, if we get any kind of stimulus, a fifth round of stimulus, as long as it's in, honestly, the next probably 6 months, we're probably still going to be okay. That's what we're going to need in order to knock out some of these deferrals that we would otherwise have toward the end of the fiscal year that we have in schools. Remember that a $14 billion goal line, which is what we want our share to be out of any stimulus package, knocks out, something north of $6 billion of the nearly $12 billion in total deferrals. So it would be important for us to get some stimulus at some point during the year, but just because they can't do it now doesn't mean all things are lost relative to the overall budget planning that we're trying to do.
Well, thanks, Kevin. And I would imagine that anybody who's at risk of losing their job as a in the Congress or House of Representatives, or excuse me, in the Senate, they are the lack of action here. I can't imagine is going to help anyone with their campaign. So, and we're hearing about pressure from those folks on both sides to get something done. Yet, there's still all this back and forth. And my favorite analogy for this right now is it's kind of like the weather in Denver. If you don't like it, just wait about an hour and open your door again, and it'll change. So every time I look at these news stories, there's a new tweet or a new argument or a new request
Yep.
from both sides sort of making noise. And really, at this point, it just feels like noise.
Yep.
So I can only check in every couple of days without pulling my hair out.
Yep. Absolutely.
With that in mind, we do talk often about the FCC and the hope of support beyond, let's say, the stimulus or something that's baked in the stimulus to see some help to close this digital divide that everyone's so focused on. And there's a really interesting article in Wired this week about the FCC using really, let's just say, not so accurate data, inaccurate data. And there's some very specific facts and figures in there where they're pointing out that the data that's being shown by the FCC is inaccurate. And that's really alarming because we haven't seen a lot of action yet. There's potentially $12 billion of support baked into a stimulus if we see one to support E-rate, which is run by the FCC. But here we are 6-7 months into the pandemic. We haven't seen the FCC come in to help close this digital divide, other than sort of big headlines about building 5G networks. We haven't seen the support we need in school districts, and it's getting frustrating. Not only that, but they're leaning on inaccurate data to make some of the claims about, let's just say, minimizing the actual problem. So, we want to urge you again, if you have not done so, to reach out to legislators and let them know how important it is that we get the support that we needed probably 3 or 4 months ago. I would say that it's time to be frustrated with the lack of support from the FCC on this. So, if we have to wait for stimulus to pass, then I suppose that's what we have to do. But it just seems like we've seen the FCC take action. Certainly, the fact that they're using data that's inaccurate and just a lack of action is not the best way to support us in this time. Wanted to call that out. That Wired link will be in the description field in this YouTube video. So if you want to check it out, it'll also be in the email that goes out to the Capital Advisors client base. So
there were a couple of things I wanted to ask you, but just to follow up on those. One is we noticed that the FCC, in all their sort of PR strategy, does sort of take credit for a lot of the stimulus money that goes out. And the thing that's important for everybody to know is there's a big difference between that generic, let's deal with COVID related issues and certainly distance learning with a big chunk of that federal money that we're getting. But it is not necessarily FCC that's doing that. In fact, if you look at the fifth round of stimulus that everybody's been drafting over and over again, those funds that are targeted toward issues with regard to ed technology would run through the FCC. And that's the kind of thing that we want, as well as the action that they can do, regulatory and otherwise, to get things moving that we haven't seen the action on. So the other thing, Tim, that I wanted to mention was we talked last week about the FCC and what they were doing on net neutrality. And this is that whole issue about, are we going to continue to have an internet that allows sort of everybody to have equal access to speeds and that sort of thing, but particularly those of us in the education community? Or are we going to move to a multi-tiered system that the higher payers get stuff and schools end up being like bulk mail? I mean, we end up being at the bottom of the heap in terms of our accessibility to the internet with regard to speeds and everything. And we're really concerned, obviously, the FCC is leaning in that direction. And one of the things that we got feedback on after our broadcast last week was a lot of people saying, hey, how do we ramp up on advocacy on this thing? And so we did put the call out to some of our national partners on ed technology, and they basically said, given where things are with the FCC right now and that it's pre-election, the real time for us to really ramp up some advocacy where we're going to actually be able to have an impact is going to be after the election. And, depending on what happens with regard to the election, the FCC may be changing a bit. And that's when we really want to jump on this issue of net neutrality again to make sure that we're getting in there and reversing some of the bias that we see right now at the FCC regarding the issue. And you think that pretty much characterizes it, Tim?
Yeah, I think when we get into net neutrality, I think there's a little bit of explanation. We gave a little bit of explanation last week about what that means, and you just gave it a little bit of explanation. But I just want to try to tie an analogy to this. If we believe that the internet is fundamental for people to learn and live and work these days, companies are coming out and saying, we're going to work remote forever. That means that to work for that company, you need internet at home. So if we start to think about the internet as a utility, if you can think about net neutrality in terms of what if we siphoned the water down or slowed the water flow to certain folks for certain reasons, or electricity, like limited your amount of electricity for certain folks for certain reasons, just without really oversight on that, just letting these groups that run maybe water and electricity make decisions like that. That's not fair and equal access to water or electricity. And it's a similar thing when we talk about net neutrality. If we believe the internet is, that critical in today's world, and obviously it is in education, then we should really get behind it. And I like your point, Kevin. Like, when is the time to take action? Post election, I agree, and we can certainly bring in some folks that could help us tell that story about the messaging that we want to get out. But it is a battle that we need to have on our radar. And if you notice, you haven't seen a ton of headlines other than the article we pumped out last week. It's more about the 5G networks that are being built and those kind of things. So it's a distraction rather than really kind of focusing in on something that could have a massive impact on us in the long run.
Great.
So great points, Kevin.
Andrea Bennett is the person who gets credit, our guest last week, for actually doing that follow-up. She connected with her partners back in Washington and said, hey, what is our best timing on this? So you'll hear more from us on this issue for sure.
Great, thank you. And along those lines, there was assembly meeting yesterday talking about digital divide and some of the challenges that we face as a state. Can you talk a little bit about that meeting and some of the challenges that came up in that?
Yeah, so of course the legislature is not in session anymore. They did conclude their 2-year session, but they do what we call interim hearings, and they did an interim hearing yesterday in the state assembly on distance learning. And of course, they talked about some of the progress that we're making, but they talked about some of the concern areas. And it was very disconcerting to hear some of the estimates of the lack of connectivity. And so I'll just give you a few different perspectives. One is they heard from Linda Darling-Hammond, president of the State Board of Education, who had an estimate of about 300,000 kids that she was estimating are not getting connectivity. Obviously, that's a major problem to the extent that we're running very, very aggressively toward distance learning in school districts. We've got to make sure we try to figure out a way to connect these kids. There was this great quote from a school leader in Marysville, the Marysville Unified School District, who made the comment that if some of my kids won the lottery tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to hook up to the internet because it's simply doesn't reach where they are because of the rural nature of where they are at. So there was a great shout out to the Small School Districts Association by state leaders yesterday who pointed out that they're helping to get data and information to policymakers so that they can try to act on that data to see how do we solve some of these issues. So that one figure that Linda Darling-Hammond had was actually the lowest of the 3 numbers that we got yesterday, because then we've got a number out of the nonpartisan legislative analyst who did sort of a calculation of how many in rural communities, how many in urban communities in terms of households are not connected. And the total combined was over 500,000 households. Well, you do that math on 500,000 households, and we know that a lot of those households with kids have more than one kid, and you start to approach the number that Tony Thurmond used, which was the biggest number of in excess of 1 million kids he suggests are not getting connected. There's obviously concerns because of our ability to reach kids and get education to them. But the other thing that we have to think about, and policymakers at the Capitol need to think about, is the way the Trader Bill language was written on the budget this year. And that Trader Bill language basically creates the burden on school districts that you will, in fact, almost guarantee that all kids are going to have equal access, that it makes the Williams settlement, which was about textbooks and other kinds of issues in terms of accessibility to all kids, apply to technology, particularly when we're doing distance learning. And that those issues are really going to be really important issues as the legislature comes back and says, okay, we gave school districts money, $5.3 billion of federal assistance to help with distance learning. Some of that money was state money as well. Now there's the imperative to make sure we're serving kids. Well, we need help on this issue, and that became really clear during the hearing yesterday. So I think that's a little wake-up call that we've got a lot more work to do. And frankly, Tim, it really fed into something that you talked about, you've been talking about several times, and that is supply chain issues. Is that a big part of the problem is just the accessibility to devices. People have the money, they are willing to spend it, but the devices for, like Chromebooks and such, as well as hotspots, are just back ordered and people aren't able to get those yet. So all of these things are a problem. And I know that's one of the topics you were going to talk about today as well.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. The digital advisors team, put out an article about the trade war with China and the potential impact to school districts. This was back in the spring, before the pandemic. And if you're buying a network or you're buying a device, there was going to be a long wait. The pandemic has exacerbated that issue, as it made it far worse. People are buying devices because they need something to work from home. Districts are buying devices to connect with kids. Meanwhile, this trade war with China, not buying parts, the slowdown of receiving things that come from China is having a massive impact on, the availability of hotspots and laptops. That's not going away anytime soon. There are massive districts in the state, in the U.S., entire states that have bought, tens of thousands of devices, and they're just on hold, waiting for those things to show up. So we don't expect that to change anytime soon. And there's another challenge that's popping up, and that is as we lean on new types of technologies to connect. Buying the cheapest Chromebook you could get your hands on in the past may have made sense. But if you buy the cheapest Chromebook you can get your hands on today, very likely can't run certain applications, and even applications that are so necessary in today's world, like Zoom. So now we need to start asking the question: will this device, the $200 device looks great, will this $200 device run Zoom? I mean, is it going to run the applications that you are going to try to run on the device? And that wasn't the case. That hadn't been the case in the past. It was, a $200 Chromebook could run just about anything on your home network. Now we got a device at a student's home or a teacher's home, and we need to make sure that it lives up to today's standards. So not only is there a lack of devices, you may see something super cheap on Amazon, or hear about an offer and you might try to jump on it, but you have to be asking the question: will this run the applications I need to run to connect with my students and teachers today, and really have impactful learning? So keep that in mind. We have an article actually from the New York Times about this lack of availability of devices, and maybe the outlook on when that might change. Again, we'll add that in the description field, so please click on that if you'd like to learn more. And with that, Kevin, I want to talk a little bit about Prop 15, something we've been talking about on this broadcast that could have some significant implications as far as state revenues. And can you tell us a little bit about what's the latest on Prop 15 and what you're seeing?
Yeah, just the update, which is just shocking to me, which is the information about what's going on with regard to the campaign spending, is we had been predicting all along that the opponents to Prop 15 had pretty much limitless resources. And maybe we're going to see something drop here in the next couple of weeks as we get closer to Election Day. But it's been startling that the yes side has actually spent more money than the no side. And you take a look at the numbers. I mean, we felt that there was a chance that the no side alone by themselves would have resources between 150 and 200 million dollars that they might spend, and maybe it'll end up that way. But right now, the yes side is spending about $54 million in the last report that we had in terms of totals. The no side, 53 million. So it's closely matched, but definitely not the outsized overspending compared to the yes side that we'd anticipated. And in fact, I think the yes side's doing a really effective job. If you take a look at the direct mail pieces they put out, as well as the commercial advertising they've had out, and they've had it out for some time, they're really affecting, I think, the way voters think before they vote. Any effort now, if the no side goes really heavy at this point going forward, they forget the fact that people are already voting, and a lot of people are already voting. It was reported by the Secretary of State that we have almost 1.5 million people that have already voted in California. So to the extent that that no campaign gets ramped up late is going to accrue a benefit to the yes side. The yes side's mounting a really impressive campaign. They might actually be able to win this thing. And then the other wild card is the issue of what does the electorate look like? And that is the more left of center. I mean, obviously that's going to advantage the yes side in terms of the campaign. In a deep blue state like California, we're likely to see, things really bend in that direction in a big way in terms of this historic voter turnout that is being predicted. So this unusually high turnout combined with the money that's being spent on the yes side, which is an impressive amount, and the shockingly low amount on the no side, could be a recipe for success. So we'll see what happens. The all-time record for ballot measure spending that still is sort of holding that record was in 2008. It was the Indian gaming measure, and the two sides spent $172 million. Well, they have the record, but one of the ballot measures is likely to surpass that one. It's the Uber Lyft ballot measure. That's Prop 22. And the two sides there have already spent $204 million. And obviously, we haven't hit election day yet. So there's going to be more spending on that. And then several other ballot measures are north of the 100 million mark when you look at combined spending. So you have Prop 23 that's out there. That's the one on dialysis, the one on rent control, Prop 21. All of those are spending more than $100 million. Just an incredible amount of money being spent this year on ballot campaigns. And that's where on the Prop 15 no side, one of the things that they could have underestimated was their ability to buy time, buy ad space, and do some of the campaign purchases they need to do, not understanding that you were going to have these other major titans in terms of campaigns bouncing off each other trying to buy airtime. So maybe it's a case of where most of the airtime's bought. I mean, if you watch TV these days, you cannot turn on the TV without running smack dab into a political ad, and it's only going to get worse in the following weeks. So, little update there. Good news on Prop 15. Again, just a reminder, this is the split roll ballot measure that would put about 40% of the revenues into education. The balance, 60% of the money goes to cities and counties. Most of those are programs that are oriented toward the same kids we have in our public schools. So all good for kids. I wish it was a higher amount of money for education, but I'll tell you, when it does materialize, if this thing does pass, we're going to need it.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I guess one other just observation on the tech side is the social media platforms are taking action with this election. A lot of significant action around when they will allow conversation and political ads to run and when they won't, and then the types of conversations that they will allow about these issues around the election, so that we'll avoid some of the previous election influencing that we've seen in the past through these social media platforms. And really, it's getting harder if you're one of these campaigns to figure out where to go reach people. Because people are not watching, broadcast television as much. They're using YouTube and these sorts of ways to reach people, podcasts. So it's getting trickier, I think, for campaigns to figure out where to spend. And then, the social media companies are looking to squash, Russian foreign actors that are trying to influence us, and that continues to pop up every day. I feel it's a little bit under the radar, but it is worth noting that that those, today's campaign has to think a little bit differently about how and where to spend the funds.
Yep.
So interesting to watch, and we'll keep everyone posted as we get closer to the election on those things as well. One thing I want to just drop in, we're talking about malicious behavior online, and there's an article that's out this week. Again, we'll drop it in the description field about ransomware attacks and a new form of social engineering, which is basically as a hacker, I'm going to learn about you, and I'm going to come at you in such a way where you believe I'm someone that you work with or in your ecosystem. You're going to click on something that launches the attack. Ransomware attackers are getting more intelligent around how to approach education, and they're posing as parents to get teachers who are hooked into your critical systems to to click on something that looks like it came from a parent and then launch ransomware attacks there. This is not going to change. These hackers are getting more clever about how they're going to approach, and there is no box that can solve this. There is certainly some technology you can put in place to try to slow it down, but this is again about awareness and about the human side of technology, and really making sure you take some time to get the messages out of be careful what you click on these days. And as we've said in previous broadcasts, make sure you're going and finding the information. If somebody brings it to you, it could be COVID data, it could be financial stuff, it could be a parent trying to reach a teacher. Really question those links that you're going to click on, because you could be putting your data, your students' data, your district's data at risk. Again, we'll have that article in the description field. And with that, we want to just say we are excited about the fall Q featured session that's going to happen on the 24th. Pam Hernandez, the executive director of Q, is going to basically be our host, and Kevin and I will get to chat with her. We also have a powerhouse in education, a gentleman named Tom Murray. You're not familiar with Tom. Tom is a big part of Future Ready and that national initiative. He's also a keynotes and has written wonderful books about education. And if you haven't had a chance, you'll love hearing from Tom and getting to pick his brain and kind of listen to the conversation. So if you haven't signed up for Fall Q, please go ahead and do so. We'll put a little advertisement in here for them. And with that, Kevin, I want to say, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up this week?
No, I think we got it covered.
Okay, everybody, looking forward to chatting with you again. Thank you so much for supporting us in these broadcasts. Have a great week, and we'll catch you next week. Thank you.
So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.